Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Wayne Michael, or Mike Hall, who is a retired brigadier general from the U.S. Army. Mike is a career intelligence officer with over 50 years of experience in intelligence operations. After retiring from the Army, he worked with military and private corporations, providing consulting services in intelligence-related matters for more than 12 years. He also created a 2-week intensive seminar for intelligence analysts and collections specialists, centering on his book, Intelligence Analysis: How to Think in Complex Environments. General Hall holds a BS from the University of Nebraska, a MS from Kansas State University, and MMAS from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, and a doctorate in education from the George Washington University. Mike Hall, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Glad to be here and glad to participate.
Yep. And I can tell you for sure that there are plenty of people who are going to be very keen to understand your thought leadership in this problem space. And so the conversation I'd like to have with you today, Mike, will really cover your entire philosophy and way of looking at informational and cognitive related problems that are facing us today, but in particular, your latest book, and we'll have a link to all of your books in the show notes, but your latest book, which I think is kind of a capstone book, The Moral Imperative of Our Time: Purposeful Intellectual Growth, with a subtitle, Developing and Using the Human Mind to Outthink America's Enemies and to Stay Abreast of Our Changing Technologies. So we are going to be getting into that. But before we do you think, Mike, you could please start us off with just your big overarching general comment about our strategic landscape, or if you prefer, the times in which we live?
Sure. And the first thing that I can say, we are in war right now, and we really don't know it. And the wars that we are in we're in mental combat, and underneath a rubric or a bubble of wars of wits against the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, the terrorists, drugs, the drug cartels, who have proven wonderfully creative in how they're beating us, and with human trafficking and drugs and fentanyl. But we are in war right now, and most of the fighting that we're doing fits into two things that we need to add to our domains of war. And there are two additional domains. One is information, and the second one is cognition. And we need to prepare people to learn how to think better, not just what to think training, but how to think, which is a higher intellectual skill of synthesis and holistic thinking. And we need to figure out why think, the philosophy of thinking. What do we want it to do and why? Those three things work together, but we need to have them combined and working as a single force to be able to then to engage our enemies in these new landscapes. The information age is different than the industrial age. And for some reason, we are just kind of plodding along at the speed of the industrial age, where we need to be able to move more at light speed, but we have to have the intellectual capacities, and we have to understand the cognitive domain and the information domain so we can get out there and move ahead and really figure out how we're going to use technology to help us fight the wars that we know are going to be in if we're not in them already right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the first thing I'd like to say. What happens right now is that information and cognition are subjugated into dimensions, which they're commodities. Basically, they're chopped and sliced and diced. And I'm not saying that we ever need to get rid of the commodity. I'm just saying we need to take a step forward and pick up the pace and develop them into warfighting domains. That, and I will talk more about that, as we move right along. The nature of warfare has changed, and for example, China is at war with us right now, but it's not just these large scale combat operations, the threats against Taiwan, but China is producing the fentanyl that's killing over 100,000 of our people every year, and they're doing money laundering. The Chinese are working with TikTok to control and depress our youth. They're attacking movies. They're getting their hands into the pockets of venture capitalists, into movie moguls, and so they can develop in the kind of minds that they want us to be, which I really take offense at all of that. But Russia's waging mental war and reflexive control operations, and always Maskirovka, their form of deception or information operations. And then we have irregular warfare that we didn't do well at in either Iraq, because we're still messing with Iraq, and we lost in Afghanistan because we couldn't outthink our foes, even though, in the case of Afghanistan, they're absolute bumpkins, but we could not in 20 years figure out how to beat these people. And so we could talk more on that as we want. But then we have surrogates that we have to deal with that are fighting us right now, the Houthis, as an example. Hezbollah is creating major problems in northern Israel. And you have Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis all being funded by Iran through the monies that people in the world are paying for their oil. So we need to take all these people on. So that's the changing nature of warfare is difficult. Another thing that's changed is intelligence is itself a weapon system, because it creates effects, it creates outcomes. So along with being a commodity, it's something that commanders can mass maneuver, swarm, disband, hide, remass, maneuver, swarm, and so forth. And so there are alliances of mutual interest that are going to come to harm us. And you and I had been talking about this before, but you have Russia, you have North Korea, you have China, and you have Iran that have formed this unholy alliance that is going to cause us great difficulties. And it's all based upon self-interest. But if we don't look at this holistically and instead try to chop it into little pieces, we're going to miss what they're really doing, where the power is really coming from. For example, the deaths of our people from fentanyl, which is a weapon system, an act of war, in my view. And the southern border won't get into politics, but you can't have an open southern border and hope to stop the flow of drugs ever. But we have to be able to beat the drug cartels. And that's a form of warfare that we sort of relegated off to the Border Patrol and relegated off to other people when it's a military problem, that we need to learn how to take the fight to these drug cartels, because they're killing us. And people just don't seem to realize it.
Yeah, yeah. So to our audience, I asked Mike this before we started recording. IPA has once a month these brown bag discussions, which are for IPA members only. And Mike has said that he would be happy to participate in one of our upcoming brown bags later this summer or maybe early this fall, to give IPA members an opportunity to ask additional questions. The only thing Mike asks is that people who attend and engage actually have spent some time with some of his work. And so he's got a website with some essays. He's got, I think, 5 or 6 books, Mike. I hope I got that right. But please engage with some of his work. It is dense. It is extensive. It is very comprehensive and well thought out. But keep your ear to the ground for Mike participating in a brown bag here in the next couple of months. And by the way, we're recording this on the 21st of June, 2024. Okay, so Mike, my introduction at the top, really didn't do your extensive career justice. Do you think you could take just a moment and describe your military and post-military career briefly to the audience?
Sure. I'll describe them as a series of inflection points, where you're moving through life and some changes. I'll start with after college, I was going to law school, and I had taken the test, been accepted at University of Nebraska Law School. Well, my little hometown in Nebraska figured that it was time for me to join the Army. And I had never been in ROTC, and so I scurried around, decided to go through infantry OCS. So I went through basic training, AIT, and then infantry OCS, and came out in October of 1970. Second inflection point, I decided to stay in. So I went to Airborne and Ranger School in 1972, November of 72 through February of 73. Then I trudged off to Korea and was a brigade S2 with the battalion on the DMZ. The next inflection point was at Fort Riley, Kansas, where I commanded a company and learned how to lead. And then I was a brigade S2 there. And the next inflection point was attending Command General Staff College first, but then the School of Advanced Military Studies. And that was the best intellectual year I ever had in my entire life. It was a wonderful year. After that, next inflection point, I went to Fort Carson, and along with being a battalion XO, after that, I became a G3 plans officer for the division. From there, I went to be the G2 of the 82nd Airborne Division for 2 years, commanded the battalion in the 82nd Airborne Division, went into Panama, and then took my battalion to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. Next inflection point, commanded brigade, the 501st Military Intelligence Brigade in Korea for 2 years, and then became a general officer and finished up as the J2 of United States Forces Korea. After that, I got to work for Joint Forces Command in their experimentation program, which was a wonderful experience. And then I developed and led a 2-week-long intense analysis seminar. Then I did that for like 8 years. And since then, I've been writing books. And so I have a total of 6 books. First one in 2003. The last one just came out here on the 24th of May. So that's a rundown of what I've been doing.
Right. So let's start, getting some wave top key points out of your most recent book. And again, this is called The Moral Imperative of Our Time: Purposeful Intellectual Growth, Developing and Using the Human Mind to Outthink America's Enemies and to Stay Abreast of Changing Technology. Could you use this as a jumping off point? And as I was reading through your book, you have 3 strong claims there at the beginning relative to the moral imperative, and I'll just read them real quickly. But you talk about the moral imperative as improving individual learning, promoting organizational learning, and encouraging leaders' intellectual mentoring of their subordinates. So could you use this maybe as a jumping off point to start stepping into this problem space?
Yes. As a leader, along with leading your soldiers, in my case, that you have a moral responsibility to improve their intellects. And so one has to approach it as, well, there is a training that you have to do, and that's what to think. And then there's the higher level thinking that one needs to do to get their people started. And that is how to think, that deals with synthesis, combination, holism, relationships, connections, and so forth. And then there's another element that is why think. And that's the philosophy that underpins the other two. And all of those three things work together as a whole. So it came to me later on in life, when I was leading these seminars, that really what I'm after is a thought leader. And the thought leader, first of all, has to learn something new every day and be humble about being stupid about things. A thought leader sees it as a moral responsibility to help his or her people learn how to think. And a thought leader then tries to help the organization adopt these different ways, but yet related ways of thinking, how to think, what to think, and why I think. So that's basically what a thought link is.
Right. Yeah. So what are some of the overarching concepts within your work at a high level, would you say?
Okay. Let me just jog down a little path here. Generally, right now, the military generally ignores the need to develop human intellects. And for some reason, people seem to think that machines are going to do all the thinking for human beings. I don't believe that. That's not true. And machines can't do what humans can do and won't do for probably all of our lifetimes. Secondly, not knowing how to think means, and a little later on, I can give you kind of a quick definition of it. There's a lack of creative thinking. There's a stifling of innovation and learning and innovation. The machine is triumphing over human beings over time. There's a lack of coherency among military schools. And by that, I mean, we should be introducing, for example, who Clausewitz was to lieutenants. And then as they come back to the institution for captains, then we introduce more theorists and let them compare and contrast. And then that connects with what they learn in CGSC that's getting more and more difficult. And then you stretch into SAMS, for example, more and more difficult and broader and wider, more demanding, high-level thinking, and culminating with the War College. But there has to be a coherency among all of those where they relate to one another and build upon one another so we get the right brains that we need at the end to be able to deal with all sources of military power and national power. There's the need for thought leaders, which we just talked about. With technology, it seems like technology people come and tell us about their technology, but what we don't do is figure out conceptually and intellectually what it is that we want to do, and then we drive technology. And they go back and they work on it, and they could come up with maybe better ways, to use technology. But we need to drive that train, and we don't do it real well. We need to improve doctrine to meet the needs of the information age, and we'll go into that more here later, because I have some very specific things. For example, I think we need to eradicate the term predict and use a softer, squishier term called anticipate, because of non-linear activities that are constantly going on in operational contexts and highly unpredictable foes who don't think like us. And so it's just foolishness to think we can predict, because that connotes accuracy. And the battle space is going to be too full of unexpected chance events that are going to stop us from doing that along with the adversaries. There's a distinct dumbing down of America. And as that curve goes down, artificial intelligence is going up. And there's an inflection point that I think we've passed. If we don't get our stuff together soon, to get a handle on artificial intelligence and what we want us to do, we will be relegated into stoking the data and, and just sitting back and watching the machine do things for us. There's a lack of quality control, true quality control in thinking, and a lack of serious, difficult reading programs. And I found that in all the 1,250 people that I worked with in my advanced analysis seminars. I shouldn't say all, but almost all didn't have a real good reading program. They don't read. And what we do as a society is we flit with data and understand. My philosophy is there's a difference among data, information, and knowledge. If you make decisions with data, then most often you're going to be wrong. But on the other hand, if you wait until you have the exact right knowledge so as to reduce your risk of being wrong, then your knowledge could be outdated. And so there's a paradox and a quandary that one has to go, and that's the decision making. It's a decision making dilemma right now, and so, but that is very definitely there. What I advocate, what I'm advocating is we add 2 domains to the 5 warfighting domains. We have air, ground, sea, space, cyber, and I want us to add information and cognition. And I'll go into what, why we have to do that. But and mostly it's because the battles, I've developed like 50 kinds of battles that I think that we're going to be undergoing. And those battles are so important that they could win or lose, any kind of a conflict that we're in. So cognition, according to Merriam-Webster, it's a conscious intellectual act. The great political theorist Hannah Arendt says that cognition is a mental function, including thinking, that connects with aim, goals, objectives, and so on. Cognition is the bridge between thinking and subsequent action or choosing no action. So it's where planning takes place and where turning plans into action. It's where assessing, it's where adaptation takes place. And so you're fighting to outthink the adversary. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to attack his plans at their inception. And think about that word, inception. That means when it comes into being. So that means you must be in his mind, thinking like he thinks, through his culture eyes and in his skins as he sees the world, and outthinking. So to my way of thinking, cognition is absolutely imperative, not as a commodity, but as a warfighting domain, because the bad guy's trying to do the same thing to us, and we don't understand that well. Information, though, remember, there's a difference between data, information, and knowledge, but the information domain is where narratives occur. It's where the data flows. It's the machines. It's a lot of cyberspace activity is happening in that domain. So I can't ascribe to it being just a commodity, but I've broadened that out into making it a warfighting domain. Now, real quickly, how to think, and I've thought about this, that, in SAMS, when I graduated there from 1985, one thing that we didn't do is we didn't define, well, what does how to think mean? But what how to think means is to exercise the power of reason by conceiving ideas, drawing inferences, and using judgment. How to think is an approach to thinking generally adhering to the thought processes of holism, analysis, synthesis, combination, coherence, relationship, connectedness, wholes, and synergy. To reason, to conceive new ideas, to form in one's mind and then defend inferences, their derivative meanings and implications. 4, demonstrate the ability to make judgments by developing meaning, knowledge, and coherent views. 5, communicate conclusions, recommendations, and defending what you have conceived. Now, if you're an intelligence person, people can sit back and say, well, intelligence people don't make recommendations. I say that's bull. You do. You're the one who knows the most about all of this because you've gone through a grueling development of conclusions. So if I were your boss, I'd crush on you and say, okay, you've given me the conclusion. Now, what do you think I should do? And some people will sit there and say, well, that's really going to make the G3 or J3 unhappy. And my view is, I don't care if I make them unhappy or not. I'm going to tell them what I think that we need to do. That cuts across all of those 7 domains of conflict. So, stop, John. You want anything to say?
Well, there there's probably like too many like follow on rabbit trails to try to unpack all of them. I'm hoping just to entice our audience with getting like just some of the big major themes and wave tops from your work, and inviting everybody to spend the time and take a deeper dive into all of your work. So I'd like to hold off on asking follow-up questions until we've kind of gotten through some of the core topics maybe. So who is your work for? Like, so do you think it's like perhaps it's specifically designed for national security practitioners and leaders, but for example, what about like corporate leaders as well? So if someone were to ask you, I'm, want to recommend your work to people, who are the people that you think is your target audience?
I'd start with always start with the military, the security people, even border agents, Homeland Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, the counterterrorism people. But I'd also get off into corporations, and I could take all of everything I've ever written, and I could turn it into business stuff. Because you can't tell me that corporate leaders aren't interested in outthinking their adversaries, whether it's domestic or whether it's foreign, and you can't tell me they're not interested in security, and if they're people and cybersecurity, and so there's a broad range of police could use the things that I'm talking about. It's a wide range, and it's how you think about it and how you can apply it to different things. And technologies should come from that thought. One of the things that I've done is, there are levels of war. There's tactical, operational, and right now the third one is strategic. And what I've done is taken that strategic and make a parentheses military. And then the fourth level is strategic, parentheses, policy and politics. That makes sure that that the military is, not trudging into, what the political aim is, what we're always fighting about, and the military people must know how to do that. Another thing that you'll find out throughout the book is that I maintain that, as in an operational context, I use that term instead of environment, but it's the context that you're going to find both linear and nonlinear systems. Linear systems are closed systems. They're deterministic for the most part, but nonlinear systems, different deal. And those of you who have read Clausewitz will think about chance, randomness, friction. And when you think about Sun Tzu, you're going to think about ordinary and extraordinary forces. And and so what I've done is I've advocated that into doctrine, we need to address nonlinear events, because nonlinear events basically are going to be surprises. They're going to be things that you didn't expect. And people throughout the ages have always faced this type of thing, but it's even more prevalent now. So what I use is, in the book, you're going to find a 6x3 table, a cell table, in which I've added things like non-additive, turbulence and change, importance of context, difficulty in finding causes for effects, friction, randomness, observed observer relationships, coevolution, adaptation, and so forth. And one of the things John has asked me to talk about is sensitive dependence on initial conditions, that we'll get to as we go through this a little bit later. But we absolutely need to be there. You're going to find in the book there is a discussion about a law of requisite variety and a law of unintended consequences. And for example, the law of unintended consequences means that things are going to happen once you perturb any kind of an environment. And they're going to be outcomes that you're just not prepared for, that you haven't planned for. And you're going to have an agility of mind, agility of organization, and agility of technology to be able not to be paralyzed or overcome with emotion like fear or what the heck am I going to do now, that you're ready. And then there's the law of requisite variety, in which there's a system is exposed to perturbations, and it's going to have several responses, and they lead to many outcomes. Of all possible outcomes, only some will be acceptable in the terms of the system's purpose or survival. And that means that you've got to have more potential outcomes in your mind than exist, because you're going to have to deal with things that you're just not ready for. So those two things are in the book. There is an increased role for artificial intelligence. One of them is as an aid to three kinds of wargaming. One type of wargaming is your intelligence analyst wargaming, which is covered in my intelligence analyst book. Another one is course of action wargaming with the three guys, the G3 and the S3 guys. And the third one is something new. It's called wargaming the adversaries wargaming, which means I want AI in the form of an avatar to be able to think like my opponent and have his aim, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, centers of gravity, and so forth from his perspective. And then I'm able to kind of peek under the tent and see what he's thinking and be able then to prepare to stop him or to draw him in via deception or to confuse him by information operations or whatever. I want AI to command and control the massing, maneuvering, swarming of things such as sensors, as drones, miniature and macro drones, as computers, as knowledge, as organizations, as virtual knowledge environments, as data and data conduits. So you can see there are 9 additional things I want to be able to mass maneuver, swarm, disband, send to hide spots, and then prepare for follow-on missions, because I think that's what's indicative of the information age. And if you don't believe me, you're seeing it play out in the Ukraine-Russia war. You're seeing it play out in Hamas versus Israel, and you saw it play out in the Hezbollah versus Israel in the incursion in August of 2006. And that is multi-domain warfare. And multi-domain warfare is challenging not only because you have to know how to think about things macro and in the micro, but there's near simultaneity of actions across all of these 7 domains that I'm talking about, and even more, and each are crushing that demand responses. And so multi-domain operations that our bad guys are using that and are going to use it against us. So we must prepare ourselves for it. And it's not just a combined arms operation, because it's a much bigger, much more complicated. And just for intelligence people or information people, it's going to be overwhelming. So that's going to take reorganizing and getting our headspace and timing different. And we're going to have to learn how to think differently. I want AI to sort the wheat from the chaff, because it's a sea of data and we've got to find the right data. Now, smart data is going to do something to help us out, and there's all kinds of potentials with that, but we've got to play it in a counterintelligence role, but also in a recursive role of being at the point of contact and be able to send back to us what the data it's seeing means. So smart data. Be the mode for surrogate travel in virtual reality. Ray Kurzweil talks about mapping the mind into a machine. Well, if that's the case, I want to be able to move with data to get into the servers and to the pictures and the plans and the secrets of the bad guy. So all of that's coming. Assist in thinking like the enemy thinks and attack their plans at inception and his strategies, and bringing forth the probability of appearance and influence of nonlinear events in complex environments. So those are some of the things I want for AI that the book talks about. The book talks about we must understand what will means. And it's not just willpower, it's bigger than that. And we need to move that into doctrine. In neither the Army nor joint doctrine is will defined or explained, conceptualized. But without doing that, and it's not doctrine, it's starved. Nobody knows what it means. And we confuse what I'm talking about when I use a 14 element model of will with willpower. Willpower is just a small part of what I'm talking about. But very quickly, let me just run you through what the 14 elements are. Life force.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. Your brain, life force, your desire, your hopes, all the good and bad things that goes on in a human being. And part of the calculus has to be willpower. Then purpose. There has to be purpose. And, for example, the first essay in the book deals with my trip to Verdun in 1985. And I lost all my notes, so I had to write it afresh last spring. And what I found is purpose was weak. The Germans' purpose was to bleed the French white, and where the French purpose was to defend their country and keep Germany from going further into it. So purpose. Then you have capabilities, you have strength of motive. That comes from Clausewitz. You have perseverance, determination, disadvantage, advantage, passion, sacrifice, the act of imposing, action. And then there's assessment, and then there's adaptation, which comes back in a coevolutionary mode to the brain. And so you can adapt faster and better than your opponent, complex adaptive system. So those are the 14 elements, and that's discussed in the book. I also discussed, though, that as two forces ram into each other, one on defense, one on offense, you're going to find a dark cloud in the middle, and that's where the intangibles and what a lot of you people work with, things like the fog of war, the culture, the quality of leadership, the population, the social media, the operational context, it's into this. And so you don't know how that's going to turn out unless you know how to think about it and how to manipulate those different kinds of things that can win or lose anything we're doing.
Right. I'm going to bundle a couple of questions together a little bit, as I think that they're probably related. So you've mentioned complex systems, and so I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit more explicitly about that. How does the concept of complex systems factor into your work? And in addition to that, why is non-linearity important for national security practitioners to consider today?
Well, complex adaptive systems, I use the M. Mitchell Waldrop complexity. I use Murray Gell-Mann, who's at the Santa Fe Institute, and Gleick's view of complexity. And from all of their work that I came up with, complex adaptive systems are not just a mechanical thing, it's a human being, basically. And the human beings' organizations are complex and they're adaptive. And the key things here is that the complex adaptive system is always going to be in competition or preparing for competition. Once in competition, the complex adaptive system has to act. And then they're going to have to see in their environment and who they aim their actions at, how they're responding. So it hit me that becomes like coevolution. And what you're trying to do is, act, and then you have to assess outcomes And from the assessment, there's a recursive data line that comes back to the brain, and that you are then responsible, to act faster and better than the opponent casts. And if you as a cast don't do that, you will lose. You will die or you will become irrelevant. So it seemed to make a whole bunch of sense to me that that's what we really are. And we're all competing, and we have to have these mechanisms that hone down, and so we understand them and understand what the opponent is doing, and to be able to outthink him and cause him to kind of slow down and not be able to move as fast. And a good historical example for you is what happened in May of 1940 when the Germans attacked into France, and the French didn't expect that they could come through the Ardennes because of armor and the trees and the hilly terrain. So there was a big deception, an Army Group B up to come where the World War I Germans had come, and their biggest armor attack came through the Ardennes force, and it broke through the lines and got behind the French and the English, and it caused an entropy, a slowing down of all the organizations and all their communication. And then the soldiers started panicking because they were fighting from two directions, and the whole thing collapsed just in a matter of a very short period of time. Dunkirk came out, and the rest of it. So that's what in a complex adaptive system, when you go back and start thinking about it, well, a person as a complex adaptive system is in a culture. They come from a culture that's very different from ours. That means they're going to emote different. They're going to think different. They're going to act different. They're going to view the world different. They're view technology different and view us differently. And so we have to be able to understand that the reason for all of those things is the culture has rules. And there are literally hundreds of rules that each culture has, but those rules are important because they guide the action models that this organism, the complex adaptive system, is going to act with, like security or like reconnaissance or like physical or kinetic energy, like information operations. But all of that is guided by these rules. And even how they judge how well they've done with outcome and recursion is going to be judged by culture, rules, and rule sets. Yeah. So I hope that gets to what you're after there, John.
Yeah, and I guess I will ask a follow-up on this. Well, first, maybe a comment. I really appreciate how you're bringing together a whole bunch of different concepts. I suppose with complexity science, it's so interdisciplinary, and we had a great conversation a couple of years ago. Two conversations. I'll put both of them in the show notes. One was with a Professor Yanir Bar-Yam, who is a complexity scientist out of the New England Complex Systems Institute, and another with Dr. Noah Komnick, who's a retired Marine, and he's got a cybernetics PhD, and he also cited Murray Gell-Mann in his interview with us a couple of years ago. So we'll put those in the show notes for people to check out. But you're bringing together, a bunch of concepts such as the law of requisite variety and recursion, just the general notion of cybernetics, which I think of as information that is looping through algorithms, if you will. And you were talking about culture, and different cultures having rules and norms, and those can be thought of as algorithms. And if you shove information into a culture, there is somewhat of a predictable outcome at that moment in time. right? But then, something pops out the other side of that cultural algorithm, but then it just gets reconsumed back into the same algorithm, except maybe the algorithm has been updated slightly because everything is changing. Here again, back to the previous question, in a nonlinear fashion, and other complex systems are engaging with that culture. Everything from politics to new technologies that are coming on board. You've mentioned TikTok, for example. There will be some additional technology that is, getting operationalized as we speak, which is going to affect the cultural algorithm and everything that we're experiencing, and on and on and on, and so it goes. And so, the question I have is, well, I wanted to maybe use all of this as a way of asking another question that I wanted to ask. And so you mentioned this previously as well, Mike, that you favor the term anticipate over predict. And so maybe taking what I was just describing in my clumsy way, how how can you use all of those dynamics that are coming together and just mixing and mixing and mixing and put that into like an anticipation framework rather than a predict framework? Do you kind of get what I'm asking?
Yeah, and they do. People like to use the word predict,
Yeah.
and uh, and I used to use it myself, particularly when I was in the 82nd. But I got smarter over time and realized that, listen, Hall, you've read Clausewitz and you've read Sun Tzu, and what they're telling us, Clausewitz was talking about friction, and that information is knowledge is wrong a lot of times, or reports are wrong because of emotions, and talking about randomness. And it hit me, that well, that battle spaces are chaotic,
Mm.
they're turbulent, and there's nothing that you can really predict with accuracy. And the use of the word prediction connotes that you're going to have accuracy. And technical people in particular like to have things really accurate. But when you have unpredictable adversaries who come from a culture differently to you, and that they think differently, and they're going to respond differently to things, that you cannot predict with accuracy what they're going to do. And
Well,
then
could I inject something into that? I think uh, one reason for that, not being able to predict with accuracy, is because uh, people like to use historical data in order to make predictions. But because these complex systems that we are swimming in, right? Because these complex systems are interacting with one another in nonlinear and unexpected and co-evolving ways, historical data over the last 6 months or year or 3 years or whatever are, it's not that the data are not helpful in telling a story of what's been happening, but using those data for predicting what's likely to happen over the next 6 months or year is kind of a fool's exercise, because those data are just not relevant to be able to make predictions because things are changing so rapidly. And so you get into all that OOLOOP kind of stuff, like, but I believe that it is possible, and to operationalize a kind of a methodology which can make like very near-term predictions, like next state predictions. So maybe you're in a kinetic operation, or maybe it's not kinetic. It's left of bang, but you're wanting to influence the unfolding scenarios globally all the time. Uh, you can use, I believe, some of the most recently collected data from complex systems. And yeah, there's lots of hand waving here, right? This is more easier said than done. But you could use like the very most recently collected data over like the last couple of days, or maybe the prediction horizon is like a month out. So you can use maybe the last couple of months of data to help predict what is likely to happen in the very near term, the next couple of days, or maybe the next month. And that's good enough to be able to get inside the adversary's like OODA loop and to outcompete. Do you kind of get what I'm saying there?
I get what you're saying, but I know human beings pretty darn well, and people, commanders in particular, are going to, get into and say your prediction has to be accurate. And what I'm trying to argue
Well,
is
it's more of an anticipation than a prediction, like
it will
what you're
never
saying.
be accurate. I mean,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
because small input leads to large outputs, sensitive dependence on initial conditions. That's why you
Yes.
can't get weather to be predictive exactly. And that's what people are going to demand, because the risk that people make with their decisions is going to demand that you put this enormous pressure on, do not screw this up. And so
Right, but what if you could put all of this into a decision making and a goal pursuit methodology, which does not require the anticipations or the predictions to be accurate all the time. So basically, like lowering the cost function, if you will, like, or the lowering the cost of being wrong so that you can make many bets or decisions, uh, knowing that most of them will be right, but the ones that are wrong don't cost that much. So getting away from what I think of as kind of like that kinetic kill mindset, where it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to think this through. We're thinking it through. All right, we're going to drop this bomb. There we go. All right, now let's all go to the O Club because we killed the enemy and we got the battle damage assessment. Okay, today is one, right? So, but going to a more of like a continual competition mindset where you're constantly making decisions and taking actions, and it's okay if a lot of those actions are not completely accurate, because it's all about continual engagement and not having this like one-off kinetic mindset. Is that maybe resonating more?
no,
No.
um,
Okay.
mostly because what my little brain adds up unpredictable enemies, that
Mhm.
the 18 nonlinear characteristics that I mentioned that are going to pop up and down, like data flow that you don't want to see because it's going to disturb you, and then the high pressure on do not make mistakes, because if you blow down that building where you are absolutely convinced Hamas has a command and control site, and you think that there aren't people hiding in there, and you end up killing 200 civilians, then you're being going to be sent to the gallows. And so another example of a guy that at least intimates this is Talib in the Black Swan,
Mm.
and and he absolutely demonizes these groups. Like an event happens, and so we all huddle together and we try to figure out what went right, what went wrong, and then use that to predict what's going to happen in the future. And from Talib's view, that isn't going to happen because the circumstances are different. The operational context, the adversary's goals, aims, goals, objectives are different. How you view them, your sensors are different. So I chose to use the term anticipate, not because I didn't think of it as important, because it is the key to the initiative and the tempo and the momentum and the position and the knowledge and freedom of movement and so forth. Those advantages all come with this. But you have to understand, in this day and age, it's going to be sloppy, and it's always been sloppy, even with all the fancy gear that we have, for collecting and listening. And there's still going to be deception. There's still going to be, even more so, that trying to figure out what's good data and what's deceptive data, or just plain bad data, because that's the meaning of data. It's zeros and ones. You know, it really doesn't have any meaning. So until you turn it into information and it's knowledge. And that's what my intelligence book says is, you know, there is that difference. And so you have to figure out how I'm going to turn this data I collected that I think is pretty good and make it information. But information's not good enough, because information a lot of times doesn't have the right setup. It doesn't have the meaning that you're needing. You really need knowledge. Well, you have to synthesize information into knowledge. Trouble is with knowledge, it has a half-life in this day and age, or it might not be good enough anyway, or you might sit and wait for the right knowledge only to have all the moving parts move right by you and you're still waiting for the knowledge. So I call that the decision maker's dilemma. But so it's this combination of nonlinear events, which we don't even have in doctrine right now, John. I mean, people aren't even there in doctrine. And then you have this unpredictable threat that is very, very good. Even, you know, you take Afghanistan, we thought they were just a bunch of savages. They just beat the living dickens out of us overall. And, you know, in Vietnam, and, you know, there are all kinds of historical things that tell us, you know, be careful with thinking that you're going to get too specific. But what it really argues for is when surprise hits you, that you are agile in intellect, you're agile in organization, you're agile in technology, and that you have tried to figure out this law of requisite variety to the best that you can, and be flexible. And I don't think that lends itself to prediction. And if you want to talk about prediction and people get paid to do it on a living, prediction, you know, is very difficult with weather, even with the satellites and the radar and everything we have today, you know, and because it's the sensitive dependence on initial conditions, the small errors, the small things that happen that you didn't anticipate that are additive until pretty soon it blows up, you know, any conclusion that you might have made. But how do you develop the holistic mindset and then get the agility built in? You have to practice as a leader in injecting nonlinear events, for example, or having the adversary do something that you think is totally stupid and you would never do, just to screw you up. And then the commander in his higher level thinking is trying to get you to learn how to think and how to adapt faster and better than the opponent, because you're never going to have it all the right, you know, to get yourself to, you know, just to the right way. Mm-hmm. So that's where I come down on this. You truly have to be worried about words, because they can really screw you up if you're not careful.
Right. Yep. You know, something else that runs through your work, and you just reminded me of it with what you were just saying, is unity of effort. I don't believe you've talked about that thus far, but could you briefly talk about the importance of unity of effort and how that, you know, fits into this overall philosophy of yours?
Yes, unity of effort means, you know, that everything is working together within a vision, and then in a complementary way. And unity effort, to me, you have to have, you're trying to develop a synergy and a synchronization, and you've got everything moving toward the right direction. But you've also have to worry about, well, what if it doesn't go quite like I want? And then, you know, and that's always been the purpose of having a reserve that, you know, moves along with you. But getting unity of effort across these 7 domains that we've been talking about really takes a lot of work. And you have to have people who understand theory and understand history and understand characteristics. And, you know, and it can't just be burrowed down into a silo. You have to be able to reach out and touch different places and different people. And that's the coordination effort. But unity of effort has been a principle of war for a long time. but it's just more complicated now since we're broadening, the things that you're trying to get unified. It's harder to do. And then how do you mass maneuver and swarm not just hundreds of things, but thousands of things to be able to create the unity of effort to maximize and optimize all the tools you have available in the information age, as opposed to the industrial age. And so I think AI and technology and visualization, for example, is going to help a lot. I think the wargaming, like I'm talking about, using AI and AI tools is going to help work these things out and work down, the military has done well with branches and sequels. But what this reminds me that I would never use the term in state. Have you ever heard that, John, the term in state?
I've heard it a lot.
Yeah. And you know what it really does, how it degrades the intellect? It connotes or suggests that there's an end to something. And so you will see in the book, what I advocate is aftermath. And to the front of that is an adjective, actuating aftermath. What connotes to you or should connote to you, well, that means that there's not an end to it. And so if you use in state, you think we're going to do like we did in 2003 in Iraq. We invade, we kick the hell out of them, and then boom, that's somebody else's job, to take care of the rest of it. And they didn't plan for the aftermath. I used the term states of continuity as, a similar way. And so that's a doctrinal change that I would make. I'd get rid of predict and I'd get rid of in state, because it leads people to form the wrong conclusion, and we miss out on planning. The most important thing is, what are we going to do after we won? Or what are we going to do after we lose? And it's called aftermath. So there has to be a unity of effort then amongst not just the military, but all elements of national power have to be synchronized in a unity of effort. And that did not happen in Iraq, as you know. It did not happen in Vietnam, as you know. It did not happen in Afghanistan. How do you get all those things working together? Well, the big brain person that I'm advocating developing here sure as heck is going to be able to do that, because my kind of learning, by the time they get to be a lieutenant colonel, lieutenant in the War College, those boys better not ever be telling me they're there for a vacation or for a rest, because I would work their butts to the bone, getting them to work on these high-level problems that incrementally and related in a unity of effort of developing brain power. I've finally got the people I want, and I'm going to have them work these hard problems so we get ready to do the best thing that we can do to win for our country.
Well,
I think that happens.
Yeah, well, along those lines, and I'd like to wrap up if we can, Mike. I mean, we're obviously we're just scratching the surface. Like all of these topics can get a much deeper dive, but for perhaps that lieutenant colonel or colonel or Navy commander who's going to top level school, what would you suggest as a research topic or something for these students to focus on if they are interested in advancing some of your work or operationalizing some of these concepts productively in support of national security? So these schools typically are what, 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year long. So it's an opportunity to have a limited scope research project that's like laser focused on certain aspects of all of this. So what would you suggest an interested student take a crack at?
I would take a look at if you're believing me or agreeing with me that we need these two new domains, then how is that going to work, and how does it figure into .mil.pf, for example? And then, what is it that we have to do to develop that, particularly relative to the national system, which we're looking at, all elements of national power, and how do we pull together all of those pieces to get it so, it's all rowing together. One of the things that I've fussing with that I've never figured out an answer for, I can get the military, if somebody would let me, I can get the military where I want them to be, that mindset. But how do you get a politician to understand Clausewitz and what he says about will and war, and war as politics by other means? How do you, because they're, and so I addressed some of that in this book, but those would be some of the things that I would do. Wargaming, what are the instruments of preparing people? Because in the National War College, and I'm sure in the other war colleges, there were people from State Department and IED and IDA, people all around the place, that you could work things out, but it wasn't challenging at all. Sam's was much more challenging intellectually than the War College ever was. So that's one thing. So the training and education to do the glide path that I was talking about, I would recommend people read my book of will, The Power of Will in International Conflict, and figure out how to get that inculcated within the minds of people. And they're going to see, non-linearity, and they're going to see operational context, and lots of thoughts about the depths of will. The second thing I'd asked them to do in my second to the last book was called Whispers from the Arrow of Time. And the first essay deals with this, the operationalization of data, information, and knowledge. And I offer some new ways of thinking about how you use those three things working together. And then the third thing, of course, is I'd have them look at if they are information people, I'd have them read the entire book. If you're an intelligence person, essays 2, 3, 4. And if you're a planner, a strategist, I would probably have them read essays 1 and 5, and then figure out how to operationalize, what I've written in there. And because I'm convinced, this is my last book, but over time I've changed and I've matured, and I finally got things figured out, I think, pretty well in, where I had erred in some ways before. Like in the Power of Will book, I had this very long definition of will, and I figured out over the next several years that it's way too long. You've got to cut this thing down, which I got it neck down in this latest version of book that you read. And so that's what I would do. And I would never, once again, I'd make a real rigorous reading program, and I'd have small groups in a war college setting, and a Socratic dialogue, but pressure. Don't be telling me you didn't read your homework last night, bud. You're here, the Army or the Navy's paying for this, and you're going to produce, or you're going to go sit with a dunce cap on in the corner. Now, I know that's not politically correct, but that's where my mind would be.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, this has been a gallop across your corpus, Mike, of thinking, which the most recent book, The Moral Imperative of Our Time, Purposeful Intellectual Growth, as a kind of a capstone on top of several other books. And so we'll have links to all of your books in the show notes for our audience to go and check out. And if you're an IPA member, or please consider becoming an IPA member so that you can participate in the to be announced upcoming Brown Bag with Mike Hall as well, where you can ask him any question along these lines and get his perspective. But with that, Mike Hall, thank you very much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible, and to be continued.
John, make sure to give your people the website for the book too.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. That is there too, right there in the show notes. So go check that out. It's mwaynehall.com, but there's a link in the show notes to that as well.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.